Hello everyone, and welcome to Sherlock Tales. Wherever you're tuning in from, whether it's morning, afternoon, or deep into the quiet hours of the night, let me ask, what time is it where you are right now? Because in this tale, time might just kill. Sit back, relax, and prepare for a mystery buried in secrets, shadows, and the relentless ticking of the widow's watch. It was a damp and featureless evening in early November, when I was roused from a light doze by the sound of tapping at the sitting room window of our lodgings at 221B Baker Street. I had nodded off in the armchair opposite the hearth while leafing through the day's Times, lulled by the steady crackle of the fire and the rhythmic tick of the mantel clock. Holmes, for his part, had remained curiously still for over an hour, perched upon the rug, pipe unlit, fingers steepled beneath his chin as his eyes bored into the embers like a prophet seeking visions. The knock came again, a light, urgent tap, more tentative than forceful, but unmistakably human. Holmes stirred slightly. "Not the door," he murmured without looking up. "The window, Watson. Kindly see who our visitor is. He, or she, has stood in the cold for at least 10 minutes before mustering the courage to call upon us." I drew back the curtain. Through the misted pane I discerned a woman, mid-30s perhaps, her shoulders hunched beneath a heavy cloak that shimmered faintly with drizzle. I opened the window, and she stepped in with a certain hesitance, clasping her gloved hands as if to keep them from trembling. "Forgive me," she said in a clear melodic voice. I was told Mr. Holmes might be willing to see me at any hour." "You were told correctly," said Holmes, finally rising from the hearthrug. "Please, sit. Your name, madam?" "I am Mrs. Julia Weatherbridge," she said. "Or, I suppose I should now say Widow Weatherbridge. My husband, Colonel Lysander Weatherbridge, died 3 nights ago, at precisely 11:57. I leaned forward. "My condolences, madam." She gave a slight nod, but did not meet my gaze. Holmes's expression remained unreadable. "You noted the time, with some precision." "Because, Mr. Holmes, I watched the very moment of his death. I was at his side, and I saw his watch stop." "That is not uncommon in moments of death," I offered gently. She shook her head. "You misunderstand. The watch stopped, not from impact, not from damage. It resisted winding for days. It tick-tocked backward the evening before he died." Now Holmes's eyes flickered with interest. "And where is the timepiece now?" She reached into her handbag and drew it out. A silver-cased pocket watch exquisitely crafted, engraved with what looked like Eastern symbols on the back. Holmes took it in gloved hands, examining it under the lamp. A remarkable item, Russian in design. No, Bulgarian, mid-century, with a Turkish escapement. "You say it ticked backward?" "Only once, on the night of the 6th. My husband was in perfect health, though quite agitated. He insisted the watch had spoken to him." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "Spoken?" "He said it had whispered his name. Then just before midnight he collapsed in his study." "Cause of death?" "The coroner ruled it a sudden seizure, but Colonel Weatherbridge had never shown the slightest signs of heart trouble or epilepsy, and—" her voice faltered. "He said something before he died." Holmes leaned in. "What?" "Only 3 words. 'It's her watch.' Then he died." A stillness settled over the room. "Who is her?" Holmes asked. She exhaled, then said with a tremor in her voice, "I don't know, but I believe my husband was murdered, and that this watch had something to do with it." As Mrs. Weatherbridge departed, Leaving the timepiece in Holmes's care, I turned to him with the weight of curiosity pressing on my chest. "Well?" I asked. Holmes placed the watch on the table and knelt to examine it further beneath the lens of his microscope. "This is no ordinary heirloom, Watson. The movement is nearly flawless, yet something is subtly wrong. A deviation in the escape wheel, deliberate, designed to count backward as well as forward, as though made to reverse time, not just measure it. But surely such a thing is decorative, symbolic." Holmes was quiet a moment. Then he said, "Perhaps. But there is more. Do you see the engraving on the back?" "Yes. Some form of calligraphy." "It is Arabic, but also Old Greek, a hybrid. Memento versare horologium. Roughly, remember to turn the clock." A chill passed over me. Holmes continued, "And that phrase, 'it's her watch,' that implies possession. Guilt even. The Colonel believed it belonged to someone who may not be among the living." "Surely not a ghost story, Holmes?" He gave me a half smile. "No ghost story, Watson. A murder mystery, but with very unusual instruments." The next morning, we paid a visit to the Weatherbridge residence in South Kensington. It was a stately house, cold and silent in morning. Julia greeted us herself and led us to the study where her husband had collapsed. Holmes walked the perimeter, inspecting every surface. I noted the books on military history, maps of the Crimea, and several antique firearms hung on the wall. But it was the desk that drew Holmes's attention, a leather-topped beast littered with sketches, paper clippings, and correspondence. "Has anything been disturbed?" Holmes asked. "Only the medical examiners," Julia replied. "I told them to leave everything else untouched." Holmes nodded and opened the centre drawer. Within lay a single folded letter, sealed in red wax. He broke it open and read silently, then handed it to me. "If the watch ever runs backward, she is near. If it stops, she is within, and if it chimes, it is too late." I looked up, chilled. "What on earth?" Holmes said nothing for a moment, then he turned to Julia. "Did your husband have enemies? Not of war, but of romance?" She seemed taken aback. I wouldn't say so." Holmes took the watch from his coat and wound it slowly. Nothing, no tick, no movement. Then suddenly a soft chime. A single note, high and sharp, like glass breaking in the distance. We both froze. "Holmes," I whispered. He was staring at the face of the watch. It was spinning, backward. There's a silence particular to fear. Cold, brittle, the kind that grips the skin and seems to muffle breath itself. That was the silence in the Weatherbridge study when the timepiece chimed. It rang once, and then the hands began their impossible reversal, spinning backward as though time itself recoiled from the present moment. Holmes did not move at first. His eyes were locked on the watch, studying its defiant gears with an intensity that bordered on obsession. "What in heaven's name does it mean?" I murmured. "It means, Watson," Holmes said quietly, "that we are in the presence of a device built not to measure time, but to mark its corruption." Julia Weatherbridge had turned pale, her gloved fingers clasped tight. "It's never done that before. Only when my husband—" Holmes abruptly snapped the case closed, silencing the spinning dial. Instantly the oppressive atmosphere seemed to lift, ever so slightly. "We must trace the provenance of this watch," Holmes said. "Every hand that has touched it, every whisper surrounding it." Back at Baker Street, Holmes placed the timepiece within a glass cloche, like a poisonous orchid. He then produced an old leather-bound volume from the upper shelf, a catalogue of rare European and Ottoman horological instruments. He flipped rapidly, muttering. "Here," he said at last. "This mechanism was not fashioned in London nor Paris. Look, here is its twin." He pointed to a sketch labelled The Widow's Watch, Constantinople, 1841. According to the entry, it had been forged by a reclusive Greek watchmaker named Eleutherios Markos, known for mechanical oddities that bordered on heretical. One such creation, the Widow's Watch, had been designed not to tell the time, but to detect impending death. "It is said," Holmes read aloud, "that the timepiece responded to the presence of the departed, that when wound in the vicinity of one who had committed an unforgiven betrayal, the watch would run from the hour of reckoning." "A superstition," I said, trying to mask my unease. "Undoubtedly," Holmes replied, "but superstitions often grow in the cracks left by missing facts." He closed the book and stood. "I must make inquiries in the East End. There is a dealer in antiquities with a reputation for memory long enough to recall Marcos's madness. You, Watson, will revisit the Weatherbridge residence. Speak with the housekeeper, the servants, anyone who might know more of the Colonel's final weeks." And so we parted ways. When I returned to South Kensington, I was greeted at the door not by Julia, but by an elderly man in a butler's uniform, his face lined and voice gravelled. "I am Fletcher, sir," he said. "Been with the Weatherbridges 30 years. Inside, he offered tea and led me to the sunroom, where I began my inquiries. "Had the Colonel seemed troubled of late?" I asked. Fletcher frowned. "The master was always a private man, sir, but these past few weeks—" "Aye, there was something." "What kind of something?" He hesitated. He was afraid, not of men, not of war, but of her. I blinked. "Of Mrs. Weatherbridge?" Fletcher shook his head slowly. "Not the current one, sir, the first period. The air grew heavier. I was not aware Colonel Weatherbridge had been married before," I said. Fletcher looked away. "It is not spoken of, but yes, 20 years ago. He married a woman named Liliane Deroux, French-Algerian, an artist. They were inseparable until the Constantinople deployment." I leaned forward. "What happened there?" Fletcher's jaw tightened. "She vanished. No body, no grave. Just gone. The Colonel came back changed. When he remarried, this house was different. Some said they heard crying at night, always at midnight, always just before a clock would chime that wasn't wound." "Did the Colonel ever speak of her?" "No," Fletcher said, "but he kept her portrait in a locked drawer. No one was permitted to see it." I stood. "I'd like to see that drawer." It took some coaxing, but Fletcher eventually led me back to the study. He unlocked the drawer beneath the desk with a brass key. Inside lay a thin bundle wrapped in silk. Unfolding it revealed a delicate oil painting, faded but unmistakably lifelike. A woman with dark, severe eyes, high cheekbones, a crescent scar just below her jawline. Her expression was not soft, it was watching, and on the chain around her neck, the very same watch. My blood ran cold. That evening, I returned to Baker Street and relayed the tale. Holmes said nothing for a moment, then leaned back and steepled his fingers. "She did not vanish," he said. "You believe she was murdered?" Holmes shook his head. "Worse. I believe she was silenced, erased from narrative, and now the narrative rebels." He turned his gaze toward the cloche. The watch had fogged the inside of the glass. Inside, a tiny crack now ran down the faceplate, barely visible like a spider's web across crystal. Holmes murmured, "The past does not stay buried, it simply ticks more softly." Holmes spent the following morning in a state I had learned to interpret as high alert, masquerading as calm. He sat in his chair, legs crossed, one hand resting lightly on his chin, the other drumming silently against the armrest. He had not touched his violin, nor smoked a pipe, nor eaten since the evening before. The cloche housing the widow's watch sat like a tomb upon the desk, and I dared not disturb it. At last, he stood. "We go to Whitechapel," he said. I blinked. "To the dealer you mentioned?" "Indeed. Leopold Zivkovich. His shop is a ruin of bone, brass, and whispers. If anyone knows of Eleutherios Markos or of a timepiece that ticks against its master, it will be him." Zivkovich's shop was an unmarked storefront tucked between two tenement blocks near Spitalfields Market. Inside, it smelled of metal polish, damp velvet, and the quiet terror of old things. Mechanical limbs hung from the ceiling. A prosthetic jaw clicked aimlessly on the counter. A cat slept atop a pyramid of fractured binoculars. The man himself emerged from the back like a whisper through soot. "Mr. Holmes," he said with surprising crispness, "I'd heard you might come. You seek something that never wanted to be found." Holmes inclined his head. "Tell me of the widow's watch." Zivkovich laughed once darkly. "You've wound it, haven't you?" Holmes said nothing. Zivkovich nodded solemnly. "It was a device born of grief. Markos built it for his wife after she drowned in the Bosphorus. But the body was never recovered. He believed she was not truly gone." "Built it to call her back?" I asked. "No," said Zivkovich, eyes narrow, "to hear her." He pulled a cloth from beneath the counter, revealing an open journal. Yellowed pages filled with obsessive scrawl. Greek and French intermixed with mechanical sketches, dials, gears, and what appeared to be fragments of faces. "There were 6 watches made," he said, "each attuned to a different hour of death. But only one, the first, spoke back." Holmes studied the journal. And what became of them? 3 destroyed, 1 melted down in Smyrna, 1 in Vienna disassembled. The 6th was rumoured to be lost in Crimea. Holmes looked up. "Lysander Weatherbridge served in Crimea." Zivkovich's expression darkened. "Then the clock has started again." As we returned to Baker Street, Holmes was silent until we reached the threshold. "Watson," he said, "imagine grief so deep it breaks time. A man seeks to build an echo of his beloved, and accidentally traps her reflection in a machine. You mean to say?" "I mean to say that Colonel Weatherbridge either acquired the widow's watch by coincidence, or he sought it out, to commune with a woman the world insisted was gone." We entered the flat, but we were not alone. Julia Weatherbridge stood by the hearth, her face pale. "I didn't know where else to go," she said. Holmes gestured her to a seat. "Has something happened?" She nodded, trembling. "I received this just an hour ago." She produced an envelope, cream-coloured, sealed in a peculiar violet wax. Inside was a card, no words, only a single etched image. A woman's face, high cheekbones, severe eyes, and the telltale scar below her jaw. It was Liliane Deroux. Holmes inspected the envelope carefully. "The wax is Turkish," he said, "used for noble seals. This is no prank." He turned the card over. Another phrase had been engraved, barely visible. "Your time was borrowed." Julia stared at the words. "Mr. Holmes." "Am I in danger?" Holmes studied her with a curious expression, something between pity and suspicion. "I believe, Mrs. Weatherbridge," he said at last, "that danger is not approaching. It is already within the house." Later that night, as we sat in dim silence, Holmes began to dissect the workings of the watch under lamplight, using instruments so fine they look better suited to surgery than horology. "Do you notice," he said, "that the central gear is asymmetrical?" I nodded. "It suggests external input, not simply mechanical decay." "You mean to say—" "I mean, someone altered it, recently." He lifted the loop to his eye again, then frowned. "Watson, bring me the oil lamp." I complied. Holmes held the watch over the flame, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, a symbol began to rise on the case back, burned into the metal, hidden under the silver finish. It was a name. DEROUX. A knock sounded at the door. We both froze. Holmes tucked the watch away and strode to the entry. Standing in the corridor was a small boy, dirty-faced, eyes wide. He held out a letter. "From the man in the alley, sir. Said it was urgent." Holmes opened it. Inside was a single phrase. "You are not observing time. Time is observing you." And beneath it, coordinates. Holmes's brow furrowed. "Watson, do you recognize this?" I did. It was the site of the old crypt at St. Ethelbert's, abandoned since the plague. A perfect place for secrets. Holmes stood and donned his coat. "Midnight, Watson. That is the hour she prefers." We arrived at the crypt just before 12. Fog clung to the earth like memory refusing to lift. The door was ajar. Within, dust, cracked marble, and the faint scent of jasmine. And atop a single stone pedestal, another watch. Identical, but this one ran forward. Holmes reached for it, then froze. A voice echoed from the shadows. Female, low, and devastatingly familiar. "I see you found what he stole." We turned. From behind a broken arch stepped a figure draped in black, her face obscured by a lace veil. Holmes whispered, "Lillian." She removed the veil. Time stopped. It is one thing to confront a mystery. It is quite another to stand before it, to meet its eyes and hear it speak, in a voice you had only imagined in dreams, or nightmares. The woman before us in the crypt of St. Ethelbert's was not merely alive. She was composed, deliberate, and wholly aware of her own legend. Holmes removed his hat. "Lillian Deroux," he said evenly, "declared dead 20 years ago, wife of a decorated colonel, now re-emerged, unaged, unbent, and in possession of a watch believed lost to war." She smiled faintly. Her cheekbones still carved shadows in the candlelight. That scar, just beneath her jaw, confirmed her identity beyond reasonable doubt. "Declared dead," she said, "but not by any physician, merely by convenience." I could not help myself. "Forgive me, madam, but you vanished without a trace. Do you deny that?" "I do not deny it," she said softly. "But disappearance is not death. It is simply a choice made permanent by others." Holmes narrowed his eyes. "What happened in Constantinople?" She paced slowly, fingers trailing along the crumbling edges of the crypt. "I was betrayed," she said. "And when a woman is betrayed, Mr. Holmes, the world gives her no justice, only silence. so I learned to speak in a different language. She turned toward the watch Holmes had found on the pedestal. These were my words. Holmes stepped closer. The widow's watch was yours? One of 6. My father was Eleutherios Markos. I felt my stomach sink. Holmes remarkably remained unfazed. You are the daughter of the watchmaker, she nodded. He made them for grieving women, but one he made for me, not to remember death, but to measure the cost of erasure. Holmes gestured toward her. Then Colonel Weatherbridge did not steal it. No, she said. He took it back after trying to destroy it. He thought if he could control it, I would vanish again. But these things do not forget their owners. And you returned now, for revenge? Her eyes glinted. I returned for truth. The watch simply called time back to me. I found myself asking the impossible. But how did you survive? All these years? She looked at me with a mixture of sadness and something like pity. You think survival is a miracle, but for women like me, survival is simply not dying loudly. I lived under another name. In the corners of the world, men don't bother to look. She turned back to Holmes, but I never stopped watching, and I never stopped listening. Holmes was still studying the second watch. Why leave this here? Why now? To show you, she said. There are 2 clocks in every mystery. One tells the story others believe, the other tells the truth. She pointed at the watch beneath the cloche in our rooms. That one ticks backward because it is measuring guilt. This one, she gestured to the forward-running watch, measures clarity. Then, Colonel Weatherbridge? Felt both? We stood in silence. Then Holmes asked, Are you the one who sent the note to Julia Weatherbridge? Number I have no quarrel with her, but others do. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Others? Lillian stepped closer. There are more like me, Mr. Holmes. Widows not by death, but by design. Forgotten, erased, or written out of inheritance. Some have watches, some have worse. The implication settled between us like fog. And the chime? Holmes asked. Her voice dropped. When it chimes once, it means one truth has returned. When it chimes twice, a lie has died. But when it chimes thrice... She trailed off. Yes? Her smile vanished. Then someone who should be dead will speak. We left the crypt with more answers than we'd expected, but with even more questions. Back at Baker Street, Holmes sat for nearly an hour in silence before finally speaking. Watson, he said at last, we must discover what the Colonel buried in the 20 years between Lillian's disappearance and his sudden death. A diary? No, Holmes murmured. He was too careful. But men who live with ghosts leave trails, often in plain sight. He looked at the 2 watches on the table. The forward watch and the backward one. Twin testimonies. Then he stood abruptly. Pack your coat. We are going to the Bank of London. The Weatherbridge family maintained a private vault in the bank's lower levels. With Julia's written consent, we were granted access to Box 317, large, polished and untouched since the week of the Colonel's death. Inside, among military medals and diplomatic documents, was a sealed tin case. Holmes pried it open. Within lay a stack of aged letters and a bound leather journal. He opened to the first page. There, written in a precise, slanted hand, was a name. Lillian de Roux Weatherbridge, 1857. The question mark chilled me. Holmes read the entries silently, then handed me a torn scrap. I saw her in Paris. She did not see me. The scar is hers. But the eyes, those are not the same. I don't know if it's guilt or ghost. The final journal entry, if she ever returns, and if the watch chimes 3 times, I will confess everything, even if it kills me. We emerged from the vault as bells rang out above. The hour was noon. As we stepped into the street, a boy ran toward us. He was breathless. "Message for Mr. Holmes, it's urgent." Holmes took the envelope, opened it. Inside, a slip of paper. Only 2 words. It chimed. We stood on the pavement outside the Bank of London, the boy's urgent message still unfurled in Holmes's gloved hand. The words were simple. It chimed. But the weight they carried was immeasurable. Holmes folded the paper slowly and pocketed it without a word. His face was set in that rare expression I'd come to both respect and fear, when curiosity sharpened into something perilously close to apprehension. "Where did you get this boy?" Holmes asked. The lad scratched his head. "Tall woman, dark coat, didn't give a name. Said you'd understand." Holmes handed him a shilling and sent him on his way. Then he turned to me. "It has chimed, Watson, thrice, which means we are no longer dealing with a memory. We are dealing with a reckoning." We returned immediately to Baker Street. As Holmes unlocked the door, a strange sensation overcame me. The sitting room felt colder than it ought to. The light from the window dimmed as if a cloud had passed the sun, though none moved across the sky. The cloche sat untouched on the table, but the widow's watch was missing. "Holmes," I said, panic rising, "it's gone." He said nothing. Instead, he walked straight to the violin case. Not to play, to retrieve a letter lying upon it. It was sealed with the same violet wax as the last card Julia Weatherbridge had received. Holmes opened it. Inside, a folded sheet of music. Not composed notation, but 3 single notes marked by simple vertical strokes. No key, no time signature. Just chime 1, chime 2, chime 3. At the bottom, a name, El Daru, and below that, a short sentence. "Your timekeeper lies." "She took it," I said. "Lillian Daru." Holmes nodded. "Of course she did. The question is not why she took it. It is why she waited until now." He held the letter up to the lamp. Faint outlines appeared beneath the music lines, a second message written in lemon juice. Holmes read aloud, "There is a 4th chime, Sherlock Holmes, but only one person ever heard it, and it broke him." We sat in silence. Holmes finally said, "We must go to the asylum." St. Jude's Asylum for the Incurably Disturbed sat along the Thames, its high walls crowned with rusted ironwork and a kind of sorrow that soaked through stone. Holmes had made previous inquiries months prior concerning a patient listed only as E.W. "Elias Weatherbridge," Holmes now said quietly as we waited in the lobby. "The Colonel's younger brother, vanished from public record 15 years ago after a nervous collapse. Lillian's brother-in-law." "Precisely." A matron led us to the east wing where the long hall echoed with the soft shuffle of slippers and the far-off murmur of unseen patients. She stopped at a door, tapped twice, and opened it. Inside, a man sat on a wooden chair staring out the barred window, thin, greying, but his spine straight, his gaze alert. "Mr. Holmes," he said without turning. "I wondered how long it would take you." Holmes stepped inside. "You know why we're here?" Elias nodded. "Because the watch has chimed 3 times. Holmes pulled a chair closer. "What happened to Lillian?" Elias finally turned. His eyes were hollow but intelligent. "She died, and lived. That is the truth." You'll need to be clearer. He exhaled. She vanished the night after Lysander received a dispatch from Constantinople. I overheard them arguing about her father, about something the colonel had found and brought home. The watch. Yes, but also letters, designs, something else, something forbidden. Elias's hands trembled slightly. The next morning, Liliana was gone. The servants were told she had taken ill and was sent away to recover. But I heard the study clock chime 4 times that night, once for every lie Lysander told. Holmes leaned forward. You saw her again, didn't you? Elias nodded slowly. A year later, at the opera, in Paris. I thought I was mad, but it was her. Different, colder, watching, always watching. He lowered his voice to a whisper. She never stopped aging, just stopped showing it. She has found ways to live through reflections, through glass and silver. Mirrors? I asked. Mirrors, watch faces, eyes. She is a woman who does not forget. We left Elias Weatherbridge with more questions than answers, but one clue burned bright in Holmes's mind. She has built herself into time's very surface, he said as we returned to the cab. We must catch her not in the past, nor in the future, but in the reflection. He paused, then added, to do that, we need a room with no clocks, no mirrors, no polished surfaces, a space where she cannot see herself. And where do we find such a place? Holmes gave a slow smile. A bell foundry. That evening we visited a long abandoned bell foundry in Clerkenwell, where Holmes had once tracked a smuggling ring. The windows were boarded, the walls thick with soot. Nothing gleamed, not even the floor. Holmes laid the forward-running watch at the centre of the room. If she truly listens, he said, then we must make her speak. We waited. Hours passed. At precisely midnight, the 4th chime sounded. Not from the watch, from everywhere, the walls, the floor, the air. And then a voice. You cannot catch the widow, it whispered. You can only remember her correctly. And then silence. The watch cracked down the middle. Holmes picked up the ruined device and stared at the fissure. It's no longer about the colonel's death, he said. It's about what he tried to forget, and whom he tried to erase. He turned to me. Watson, we are no longer investigating a murder. We are unravelling a vengeance stitched through time. The crack in the second widow's watch marked a turning point, not only in the case, but in Holmes's bearing. He had, until now, operated within the perimeter of probability, but that fracture, formed by a sound with no source, had pushed him beyond deduction into something more akin to belief. Not in ghosts, mind you, but in mechanisms whose purpose was darker than death and older than guilt. We returned to Baker Street just past 1 o'clock in the morning. The city lay still, subdued by mist, the lamps along Regent's Park blurred into halos. Inside our sitting room, all was as we had left it, save for a new envelope tucked under the door. Holmes picked it up wordlessly. I stood beside him as he tore it open. This time, no wax seal, no music, just 3 words. She remembers everything. She, I said slowly. Liliane. Holmes shook his head. Not Liliana. He turned the card over. A symbol had been inked in the corner. A stylized W, but interwoven with serpents. Ancient, feminine. He held it up to the lamplight. Watson, he said quietly, do you recall the Weatherbridge family matriarch? Lady Agatha, the colonel's mother? Holmes nodded. Still alive, or so the records suggest. though she has not been seen in public in nearly a decade. You think she knows something? I think, he said, that the only person still living who can explain why Colonel Weatherbridge feared his own timepiece is the woman who taught him never to trust clocks. It took considerable effort to gain access to the Weatherbridge ancestral estate in Hampstead Heath. The gates were rusted, the grounds overgrown, the great house itself swallowed by ivy and shadow. No one answered our knocks, but Holmes, ever prepared for silence, found a key hidden beneath a lion-headed statue at the gate-post. With a glance toward me, he inserted it into the lock. The door creaked open. The air inside was stale with old perfume and dust. Mirrors covered in black cloth lined the hall. Grandfather clocks stood dead in their cases, weights removed, hands stopped at different hours. "Notice," Holmes murmured. Not a single reflective surface left exposed. I felt a coldness on the back of my neck. "Holmes," I said, "what is she afraid of seeing?" He did not answer. We found Lady Agatha in the upper library, seated in a heavy chair beside a fireplace that hadn't been lit in years. She wore a dressing gown of deep green, her hair long and silver, her hands folded over a blanket. A glass of milk, untouched, sat beside her. She did not react as we entered. "Lady Weatherbridge?" Holmes said gently. Her eyes, a dull green, turned slowly toward him. "Sherlock Holmes," she said. "Took you long enough." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "You were expecting me?" "Of course. Time always keeps its appointments." We sat across from her. She did not blink. "Lady Agatha," Holmes said, "we believe your son may have been murdered, or frightened to death. We also believe that watch—" She cut him off. "The watch was never his. It belonged to Liliane." "It belonged to no one," she said. "Not in the way men own things. It's a relic, a reliquary, of grief." Holmes leaned forward. "Then you do know it?" "I know it the way one knows a fire by its smoke. My son feared it, but he also believed in its logic. He thought if he could master it, he could rewrite the end of things." "And could he?" Lady Agatha's eyes sharpened. "No one rewrites the end, Mr. Holmes. They only postpone it." She reached beneath the blanket and withdrew a locket. "I took this from him after Liliana vanished." She opened it. Inside, a miniature painting of Liliane, identical to the portrait Watson had found in the study, but opposite it, something else. A thin gear, scorched black and cracked. "It came from the original watch," she whispered, "after it first reversed itself." Holmes examined it. A part of the inner escapement. Yes, it snapped the moment the Colonel told his first lie. I could not stay silent. "You speak as if the watch knows." She looked at me. "Doctor Watson, the widow's watch does not know, but it listens, and it remembers what is forgotten." Holmes asked, "Did you know Liliane was alive?" She looked down. "I suspected. A mother knows when her children are lying, and my son, my perfect son, had built an entire world on the denial of that night." "What happened in Constantinople?" Agatha Weatherbridge took a long breath. "They fought. He struck her. I don't know why. Perhaps jealousy. Perhaps she uncovered something she was not meant to see. She disappeared." "She chose to disappear," she said. "She let the watch be her message." We sat for some time in silence. Holmes stood. "You covered your mirrors." She looked up. "I do not wish to see myself in a world where Liliane has returned." We thanked her and left. As we exited the house, Holmes stopped in the garden path. Watson, he said softly, we must return to South Kensington. To Julia? Number to the study? Why? Because there was a fourth chime, and if Lady Agatha was right. He did not finish the thought. We reached the Weatherbridge residence just before dawn. Julia greeted us at the door, bleary-eyed, and let us in without question. Holmes went straight to the study and removed the top panel of the writing desk. Behind it, hidden in a hollowed-out space, was a second drawer. Inside, a sealed letter. Holmes slit it open and read silently, then passed it to me. To be read in the event of the fourth chime. If the widow has returned, then know this. I never killed her, but I betrayed her just the same. I buried the truth in clocks and shadows. I feared the sound of time because it measured not just age, but penance. The watch is not cursed. It is faithful. Faithful to memory. And memory is always fatal. At the bottom, one final note. There is a fifth chime, but only one man alive knows what it means. His name is Arvin Holt. He lives on the river, and he never forgets. Holmes folded the letter slowly. The fifth chime, he said, will not simply mark the return of the past. It will bring judgment. The Thames at dawn is unlike any place on earth, cold, slow, and brimming with the secrets of a city that pretends not to feel them. We walked along the embankment just after sunrise, Holmes leading the way, his gaze scanning the mist like it held sentences. He said little, and I did not press him. The name Arvin Holt carried no weight in the official registers, no criminal record, no military history. Yet Colonel Weatherbridge had named him the only man who knew what the fifth chime meant. That made him, by Holmes's measure, the most important man in London. We reached an inlet near Lambeth Marsh. Here the city broke down into warehouses, ferrymen's shacks, and silent barges moored in greasy water. Holmes stopped at the third pier and examined the side of a boathouse. Scrawled into the wood in faded chalk, "Speak only what you cannot write." He nodded. This is the place. The door creaked open before Holmes could knock. A man stood in the shadows within, tall, weathered, hair the colour of tarnished steel. His eyes were pale and unblinking, watching us with the sort of stillness found in animals that have long forgotten to fear. "You've come for the chime," he said. Holmes inclined his head. "Mr. Holt?" "Aye." "Sherlock Holmes, this is Dr. John Watson. I know who you are." He stepped aside and beckoned us in. Inside, the boathouse was astonishing. Clocks, hundreds of them, lined every wall. Not a single one ticked. They were frozen at various hours, each precisely stopped. Some had shattered faces. Some were perfectly intact. All were silent. Only one object in the centre moved. A bronze pendulum encased in a glass sphere, swinging without sound. "You collect broken time?" I asked. Holt stared at me. "Time isn't broken. It's just remembering." Holmes approached the pendulum. "Do you know what the fifth chime is?" "I do," Holt said, "but you may wish you hadn't asked." We sat around a small iron stove as Holt poured tea that tasted faintly of sage and ash. Holmes remained quiet until the cups were down. "What was your connection to the Colonel?" he asked. Holt sipped, then said, "I served with him. Crimea, before the marriage, before the watch." "Did you know Liliane?" He nodded. Better than he did. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Arvin," Holt continued, "was not my first name. My mother was Greek, my father French. My real name is—" He paused. Arven Marcos, I gasped. You're her brother. Half-brother, he corrected. Our father, the watchmaker, left 2 families. One here, one in Galata. Liliane and I met once when we were boys and girls. Years later, in Paris, we met again. Did she know who you were? She did, the night before her wedding. The air seemed to contract. Holmes broke the silence. The 5th chime. Tell me. Holt stood and walked to the pendulum. He pressed a switch and the sphere stopped mid-swing. Each widow's watch was built to mark a moment. Love, loss, lie, return. He turned to us. But the 5th chime is undoing. It is the moment memory becomes unbearable, when the truth no longer binds and time tries to reverse itself entirely. Holmes frowned. Reverse history? Holt nodded. Not like fantasy, not time travel, something worse. The unravelling of everything held together by a lie. Colonel Weatherbridge feared it. He heard it, Holt said. He walked to a trunk near the wall and opened it. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a small, damaged mechanism. The original prototype, he said. Liliane gave it to me after she vanished. Said I'd know when to wind it again. Why now? Holt looked up because she's preparing for the 6th. The 6th chime? Exclaimed as he nodded. The final, Holmes said. The Colonel thought there were 5. He wasn't the final chapter, Holt said quietly. He was just the first to break. Holmes stood. If Liliane intends to chime a 6th time, we must stop her. Holt placed a hand on Holmes's arm. You can't stop her. You can only understand her. That's the price. Holmes's voice dropped. And what is the price? Holt said nothing for a long time, then whispered, You have to give her your time. We left the boathouse just after noon. Holmes walked in absolute silence until we reached the bridge overlooking the river. There, he finally turned to me. Watson, he said, I believe we have misunderstood this case entirely. In what way? He stared at the water, brow furrowed. We have assumed the watch was a device of memory, but it is not. It is an instrument of confession, a chamber of truth for the condemned. And who is the condemned? Holmes looked up at the sky. I am beginning to suspect it was never the Colonel. That evening, we returned once more to Baker Street. Julia Weatherbridge awaited us, seated in the study beside the cloche. Only now the first widow's watch had returned, unwound. Crack down the centre, Julia stood. I found it on my pillow, she said. Holmes approached, his voice soft. Did you hear it chime? She nodded. Once. She shook her head. Twice? Again she shook her head. Julia, Holmes said gently, how many times did it chime? Her voice was barely audible. 5. Holmes took one step forward and then stopped. 5, he repeated, and yet you are unharmed. She blinked, confused. Should I not be? Holmes turned toward the hearth and stared into the cold ashes. No, he said softly. You shouldn't. Not if the 5th chime was meant for you. I felt a tremor of unease rise in me. Holmes, what are you saying? He turned to face us, his expression unreadable. I'm saying, he said, that the 5th chime was not for Julia. It was for me. There are moments when the world tilts imperceptibly on its axis, not in the way of earthquakes, but like a pendulum swinging slightly wider than expected. Holmes, who had always placed himself outside the machinery of the mysteries he solved, had just placed himself inside this one, and the sound it made was unbearable. Julia clutched the watch. But why you? What does it want from you? Holmes crossed the room and gently took the device from her hand. He turned it over, examining the cracked dial. The minute hand was missing. "I first saw this watch 15 years ago," he said. "What?" I said. "In Paris. I was investigating a theft at the Palais Garnier. A man had disappeared, but what I found in his apartment was a box containing this very model. You never mentioned this. I didn't understand it then, but now I realize Liliane was already moving, already watching, and she wanted me to see it." He placed the watch on the mantel. "I believe I was chosen." We sat down, the three of us, and Holmes began to tell us a story I had never heard. About a woman in black who moved through embassies like smoke. About an antiquarian in Marseille who died clutching a clock that had run backward for hours. About a letter Holmes had received in 1888, unsigned, that simply read, "When the hour comes, your name will be the last chime." Julia leaned forward. "So, you've been haunted." "Not haunted," Holmes said, warned. "And now?" I asked. "Now," he said, "I must be judged." That night, Holmes did not sleep. He sat in his chair facing the hearth, the watch ticking faintly beside him. I too remained awake, scribbling these words by candlelight as the fog coiled against the window panes like a living veil. At exactly 3 minutes past 3 in the morning, the watch chimed once more. The 6th chime. But it was not a sound we heard with our ears. It was something in the bones. Holmes stood slowly. He did not speak. And then, across the mirror above the fireplace, a figure appeared. She did not walk into the room. She simply was there. Liliane Deroux, or her shade, or the reflection of something Holmes had carried inside him for far longer than I'd realized. Holmes did not flinch. He nodded once. "I am here." The reflection did not move its lips, but a voice bloomed in the room. "You tried to solve me." "Holmes, I did." "You tried to forget me. I failed." "You tried to hold back time." "And now it holds me." Julia screamed. The reflection opened its mouth, and all the clocks in the room began to tick at once. Fast, then backwards, then in unison, and then they stopped. Dead silence. Holmes stepped forward and touched the mirror. "I accept," he whispered. The image vanished. The watch on the mantel split cleanly in two. The room exhaled, and Holmes fell to his knees. We rushed to him, fearing the worst. But he was alive, shaking, pale but breathing. He looked at me with eyes I had not seen in years, softened, vulnerable. "She showed me," he said, "everything." "What did you see?" "Myself," he whispered, "as I was, as I could have been, as I chose not to be." He turned to Julia. "Your father was not a villain, but he was a coward, and he died trying to unring a bell he himself had struck." In the early hours of the morning, Holmes wrote a letter. He sealed it with black wax. He gave it to Julia. "This," he said, "is for your family. Open it when you feel the clock turn, not before." She left in silence, the letter clutched in her hand. Holmes turned to me. "We are nearly at the end, Watson." I nodded. "And the 7th chime." He smiled faintly. "There was never a 7th, only the echo.